One of the stranger moments from this weekend's rally was when President Trump mentioned he might be interested in expanding the death penalty for drug dealers. Take a listen.
The only way to solve the drug problem is through toughness. When you catch a drug dealer, you gotta put him away for a long time. When I was in China, and other places, by the way, I said, Mr. President, do you have a drug problem? No, we do not. I said, big country, 1.4 billion people, right? Not much of a drug problem. I said, what do you attribute that to? Well, the death penalty.
Now, he sung this note before heaping praise on Philippines dictator Rodrigo Duterte for his war on drugs, which has killed tens of thousands of drug dealers and users extrajudicially, that is, without due process. That is not something any Democratic president should applaud. Nonetheless, many Trump supporters will undoubtedly agree with him that the answer to our national opioid crisis that's killed 64,000 people in 2016 alone is killing more people. But they shouldn't. It doesn't make practical or political sense. I'd also argue it's time for conservatives to abandon their support of capital punishment in general. It simply isn't conservative. Let me turn to the table for this one. Is the death penalty for drug dealers a good idea?
Well, President Trump is a hammer, so all he sees are nails. The answer to him, to almost every question, is toughness. And his version of toughness in this situation is capital punishment. But there are a lot of other ways to be tough on the opioid epidemic that doesn't involve killing more people. And I think that would be a more productive conversation.
I also think this conversation would have been different if it were rolled out in a pantheon of other policies that we're looking to. But to talk about it in isolation makes it seem as though, rightly or wrongly, that the president believes that it is a
this is the idea,
fix, a silver bullet.
Right.
And I would say the president is usually really good about understanding where his base is, where his most fervent supporters are. I think on this issue he's wrong, and we've seen it before. When Sessions talked about like starting to crack down on states that had legalized, marijuana, there was a pushback immediately from some of his most vocal supporters.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a whole lot of folks in the the Trump supporting sphere out there who've been praising this. I actually think the president, it sounds good to him, I'm sure, but I actually think he's wrong here. I actually think he should be, this is the wrong approach.
Demonstrably he is. I actually wrote about this in today's New York Daily News. Conservatives have been coming to the criminal justice reform table for a while now. Conservatives from Newt Gingrich to Rand Paul to Grover Norquist are actually very much in favor of this, and that's because the war on drugs has failed, and a lot of people know it. But also, Chris, as you mentioned, Trump's own base, 81%, according to a Koch Institute, which is right-leaning, 81% of people who voted for Trump in this poll said that criminal justice reform was either very important or somewhat important, and 54% of Trump supporters report knowing someone who is or has been incarcerated. So they feel very connected to the failures of the industrial prison complex.
Well, as you pointed out,
and so I don't know where Trump thinks there is political support for this other than maybe in the Philippines.
I don't know, because honestly, as you mentioned, there's a whole lot of conservatives who've been actually leading on this issue. Organizations like Freedom Works have been doing great work on this. I mean, it's not just your hardcore libertarians.
No, and state houses and legislators all over the country.
Absolutely. We've seen that this has failed. This approach has failed.
Yeah. Earlier today, though, you were tweeting about this, and I noticed that there was someone who tweeted at you about the fact that they've lost a loved one to this epidemic. And I do think that is part of what he's banking on, right? If you are on the trail, if you hear people talking about this, I think there is an impulse to say, we have to stop this. What can we do? What we're doing is not working. And to your point, his instinct is to pivot to the toughest act possible.
What is the build the wall version for drug? What is that slogan? I can understand why kill the drug dealers has that quality for him that seems similar. And to your point about, if you lose a loved one, you may feel that person was murdered by whoever it was, a drug dealer, and you want to see that person punished. Obviously, we've been trying that in this country for decades through the prison system, and it maybe hasn't worked. But I think I can understand the impulse to try something new. I can understand it. And I wonder, this is one of those issues the president can win a lot of people over, a lot of skeptics, a lot of critics. If he can help make progress on the opioid issue, he will win a lot of people over who otherwise don't support him.
I was going to say, the problem is that the opioid epidemic has been fueled by this failed war on drugs. I mean, that's what is frustrating for me as a Trump supporter and as a conservative. I want to see the president tackle this, but the answer is not to be putting the death penalty
in the other direction,
and he's wrong. And Sessions,
there's two failures we can point to here. One is the failed war on drugs, and so we probably shouldn't do more of the same, only harder.
Right.
The second is the failure of capital punishment generally to deter capital crimes. We have tons of statistics and scientific research now and data to prove it is not a deterrent. I have long been arguing that the time to abandon capital punishment for conservatives has come. One, it's not a deterrent. Two, it's really costly. It's expensive to house death row inmates compared to regular prison population. Three, it is oftentimes unjust when you have numbers in the hundreds and maybe even thousands of wrongly convicted people who are later found to have not been guilty either by DNA or new evidence. That should be alarming to people. It is not a just system, and we shouldn't allow for occasional innocents to be killed, executed by the state. And finally, if we are the party that is pro-life, and I believe it's important we are, you cannot be consistently in favor of the death penalty, but not in favor of abortion. You can't argue that some lives are valuable and others aren't. Are we poised to change on that issue, Chris?
I hope so, and I think young conservatives absolutely are, and I think that we've seen the momentum among conservatives to change on this issue. And by the way, one time being wrong, one innocent person being put to death by the government
should shake us.
It's too much.
I agree. Okay, well, we'll see if this is that moment. Sit tight. We'll be right back.